Ancient Egypt, 2300 BCE. A servant is forced to feed a wild hyena, its teeth inches from his throat. This wasn't a pet. It was a high-stakes gamble that defined the line between civilization and catastrophe. One slip, one moment of inattention, and those premolars close with 1,100 pounds per square inch. This scene from ancient Egypt captures exactly why most domestication attempts ended in failure or death. Most animals fail the domestication lottery. Of the world's 148 large mammal species that could theoretically become our companions, only 14 made it through the biological gauntlet. The rest? They remained wild, dangerous, and often lethal to the humans who tried to tame them. We are going to test humanity's most ambitious attempts against the 6-part filter that determines which animals can be domesticated and which will always resist. From hyenas, force-fed in Egyptian palaces, to pigs that found us through our waste. From raptors that never surrendered their wildness to proto-dogs lost to climate catastrophe, and cave bears caught between our fear and reverence. The failures weren't just disappointments. They brought disease spillover, wasted precious calories, and near misses that shaped which human populations survived and which didn't. 6 biological filters determine domestication success. Pass all 6, and an animal might become humanity's partner. Fail even one, and you are left with an animal that can injure you, drain your resources, or spread disease. The first filter is diet efficiency. Carnivores are protein-negative investments, requiring vast quantities of meat to sustain. Herbivores and omnivores convert plant calories efficiently, making them viable partners. Growth timing creates the second barrier. Animals must mature within human planning horizons. Species requiring decades to reach useful size represent impossible investments for societies operating on seasonal cycles. The third filter is captive breeding. This is where the domestication process often dies. Cheetahs could be tamed but never domesticated because they refuse to breed in captivity. They require long-distance courtship runs that no enclosure can provide. Temperament creates 2 barriers: inherent aggression and panic response. African buffalo resemble cattle but remain unmanageably violent. Gazelles leap 8-foot fences when startled, while sheep flock together for manageable herding. The final criterion is social hierarchy. Pack and herd species with dominant structures allow humans to insert themselves as leaders. Wolves, horses, and cattle all accept human authority through these existing social frameworks. Animals lacking hierarchical structures resist control. Cats found their own path through commensalism, exploiting settlements without surrendering independence. These biological barriers did not stop ancient humans from trying. Along the Nile, Egyptian elites discovered exactly how dangerous it could be to ignore them. The tomb reliefs at Saqqara tell a story that should not exist. Carved into the mastaba of Meroruca around 2300 BCE, artists documented something that defied every rule of safe animal management. Striped hyenas on leashes, muzzled and restrained, while servants force-fed them meat and fowl directly into their gaping mouths. This was not pet ownership. This was controlled violence masquerading as luxury. The hyena's entire anatomy screams danger. That crushing bite force comes from massive jaw muscles powering teeth designed for bone destruction. The hyena's skull features a prominent sagittal crest, a bony ridge running along the top that serves as an anchor point for enormous jaw muscles. These muscles generate forces that funnel through specialized conical premolars, designed not just to pierce flesh, but to fracture and crush bone. The teeth themselves feature unusually thick enamel that resists the stresses of osteophagy, or bone eating. Every aspect of the hyena's cranial architecture represents millions of years of evolution optimized for destroying materials that would shatter human bones. These were not the spotted hyenas of East Africa, whose pack hunting behavior makes them even more dangerous. The Egyptians worked with striped hyenas, smaller and more solitary. Ancient sources noted they were easily tamed when young and could become as amenable as well-trained dogs. That behavioral flexibility made the attempt possible, but it did not make it safe. The archaeological evidence from Tel El Amarna reveals what this was really about. Excavations of the city's garbage dumps uncovered butchered hyena bones, indicating systematic muscle stripping and marrow extraction. Cut marks on the bones prove these animals were not pets being pampered. They were exotic livestock being fattened for elite tables. The force-feeding scenes suddenly make sense. Egyptian nobles did not train hunting companions. They were creating living meat storage, turning the ultimate scavenger into a luxury food source. The irony is profound. Animals that fed on what others left behind became the ultimate delicacy for those who could afford anything. This prestige economy carried hidden costs that went far beyond the obvious injury risk.
Hyena meat harbors trichinella parasites, and consuming undercooked carnivore flesh can trigger trichinosis, a disease causing fever, muscle pain, and potentially fatal complications.
Trichinella cysts have been found in Egyptian mummies, confirming that the parasite circulated in ancient populations. The archaeological silence tells the story. No hyena skeletons show morphological changes of domestication, no shortened snouts, no juvenile features, no reduced brain size. While Egyptian elites played with death for status, another species was quietly slipping into human lives through a far less glamorous pathway that led through our trash. Early Neolithic settlements created something unprecedented in Earth's history: concentrated human waste. For the first time, large groups of people stayed in one place long enough to generate massive refuse piles. Middens packed with food scraps, broken pottery, and human excrement. Wild boars, ever opportunistic omnivores, discovered this ecological gold mine and began to exploit a niche that no other large mammal was filling. The evidence of this relationship comes from an unexpected source: fossilized dental plaques scraped from 8,000-year-old pig teeth in China's Yangtze River Valley. The pigs were not just scavenging, they were living sewage systems. Wild boars shadowed settlements, scavenging waste that required no foraging effort. Proximity became dependence. The boldest individuals gained access to reliable food, while cautious relatives competed for scattered forest resources. Selection pressure favored animals that could tolerate human presence. Brains shrank by roughly 1/3. The intelligence needed for wild survival became unnecessary when food appeared predictably at settlement edges. This brain reduction represents a fundamental evolutionary trade-off. Wild boars need large brains for complex survival, remembering food locations, detecting predators, and navigating social hierarchies. Commensal pigs living at settlement edges needed none of these capabilities. The massive neural infrastructure became metabolically expensive dead weight. Natural selection favored animals that redirected energy from brain maintenance toward growth, creating perfect adaptation to their new niche. Zoonotic pathways opened between humans and commensals. The whipworm eggs document one disease vector among countless others circulating through this waste relationship. Early settlements lacked sanitation, creating perfect conditions for emerging diseases that would plague agricultural societies for millennia. Pigs succeeded where hyenas failed by passing the critical tests: omnivorous efficiency, rapid maturation, flexible breeding, manageable temperament, and social structures that accommodated human provisioning roles. The commensal pathway represents domestication at its most elegant and most dangerous. Animals domesticated themselves by exploiting human-created niches, but the epidemiological costs were largely invisible to the humans who benefited from the arrangement. Some animals, however, partnered with humans without changing their genes at all, raptors that kept their wildness. 4,000 years ago, on Iran's windswept plateaus, someone carved detailed hunting scenes into rock faces that should not exist. The petroglyphs show human figures with birds of prey perched on their arms, connected by what appear to be leashes or tethers. Some scenes include dogs suggesting coordinated hunts between three species. These images suggest falconry emerged thousands of years earlier than previously thought. However, what makes these ancient partnerships extraordinary is that we never actually domesticated these birds. Instead, humans had to negotiate with fully wild predators every single day. The process demanded perfect timing and constant danger. Every step risked life and limb, managing apex predators that could vanish or attack at any moment. The birds returned not from loyalty or genetic programming, but because the partnership paid dividends. A successful hunt meant shared prey and energy saved. But that calculation reset every morning. These remained fundamentally wild animals, making daily cost-benefit analyses about cooperation. The stakes were absolute. Unlike dogs or pigs, which showed clear morphological changes through domestication, raptors retained every aspect of their wild phenotype. No shortened beaks, no neotenic features carried into adulthood, no reduced aggression or modified social behaviors. One mistake, a moment of inattention during feeding, a miscalculation during training, and the bird simply vanished into the sky. Or your hand paid the price in talon lacerations that could sever tendons or damage eyes. Testing raptors against our domestication criteria reveals why this partnership never crossed the threshold into true domestication. They fail captive breeding spectacularly. Most birds of prey are solitary hunters with complex territorial and courtship requirements that captive settings cannot accommodate. They also fail social hierarchy completely. These apex predators evolved as solitary operators with no pack dynamics for humans to exploit. Yet the relationship persisted across millennia and continents because it provided something neither species could achieve alone. For humans, trained raptors provided access to prey in terrain where ground-based hunting was unsuccessful: cliff faces, dense forests, and open skies. The bird's speed and aerial perspective complemented human strategy and tool use. For the raptors, the partnership provided predictable food sources and protection from larger predators during vulnerable periods. However, this remained a daily negotiation between wild minds, rather than the genetic restructuring that defines true domestication. But the costs were continuous. Talon lacerations could disable handlers. The food burden strained resources. Every generation required starting over with wild-caught birds, sustaining danger indefinitely. Modern falconry continues this ancient pattern. Despite thousands of years of practice across multiple continents, we have never created a domestic hawk. Some birds are now bred in captivity, but they remain genetically and behaviorally identical to their wild cousins. Every falconer still begins with essentially wild animals that must be individually trained, managed, and constantly negotiated with. The raptor relationship represents mastery without domestication, proof that not every useful partnership requires genetic submission to human control. If raptors never yielded their wildness, wolves sometimes did, and sometimes those early bonds died with the ice.
Deep in Goyer Cave, Belgium, archaeologists uncovered a 36,000-year-old skull showing unmistakable domestication signs. Shortened snout, wider palate, crowded teeth.
Thousands of kilometers away, in Siberia's Altai Mountains, another skull from Razboinichia Cave tells the same story at 33,000 years old. These were not wolves anymore. The domestication process was underway across multiple continents. But these lineages represent evolutionary dead ends. Genetic analysis reveals neither specimen contributed DNA to modern dogs. The last glacial maximum provides the answer. Around 26,500 years ago, climate catastrophe struck northern Eurasia. Small proto-dog populations could not survive the resource crunch, and entire lineages blinked out. Yet something profound emerged from the post-glacial recovery. At Bonn Oberkassel in Germany, a burial dated to 14,000 years ago reveals a fundamentally different relationship between humans and dogs. The grave contained two humans, an older man and a younger woman, buried alongside a juvenile dog. But this was not a symbolic burial or ritual sacrifice. The dog's teeth tell a story of extraordinary human care. Dental enamel analysis reveals 3 distinct lines marking severe illness episodes when the puppy was 19, 21, and 23 weeks old. The pathological pattern matches canine distemper, a viral disease with a 3-week course and extremely high mortality rates in young animals. For this puppy to survive 3 sequential attacks of distemper, intensive human intervention was required. This care was economically irrational. A gravely ill puppy provided no hunting assistance, no protection, and no utilitarian benefit to justify the resource investment. The humans at Bonn Oberkassel were expending net costs to maintain an animal that, from a survival perspective, should have been abandoned. The burial itself reinforces this interpretation. The dog was interred with the same grave goods as the humans, suggesting it had achieved a social status equivalent to that of family members. This was not livestock management or tool maintenance. It was emotional attachment that transcended economic logic. This non-utilitarian bond may explain why post-glacial dog domestication succeeded where earlier attempts failed.
The Goyer and Razboynica lineages operated primarily through utilitarian partnerships, wolves that provided hunting assistance or camp protection in exchange for food sharing.
When resources became scarce during the last glacial maximum, these relationships could not justify their costs. But the Bonn Oberkassel evidence suggests something had changed in the human-dog relationship. Emotional investment and cross-species empathy had emerged as factors in partnership maintenance. Groups willing to care for sick animals during resource scarcity possessed social surplus and psychological flexibility that may have provided survival advantages during subsequent environmental challenges. The willingness to invest in non-utilitarian relationships may have been the crucial factor that allowed human-dog partnerships to survive climate catastrophes that destroyed earlier attempts. Some animals, however, we could never bend to our will. Too big, too dangerous, too laden with symbolic power. Yet we kept encountering them in the places we needed most. Deep underground, where survival meant sharing space with giants. Pleistocene Europe presented an impossible choice. The best caves for human shelter were already occupied by giants. Cave bears were massive, herbivorous giants that claimed the deepest, most protective caves across the continent, precisely the shelters that human populations needed to survive the brutal Ice Age winters. Competition was inevitable. Coexistence was deadly. Archaeological evidence suggests that systematic bear hunting occurred during hibernation, when the animals were confined to their dens. The strategy required extraordinary courage. Success meant fresh meat, warm hides, and valuable cave access. But one misstep meant death. Deep in caves like Drachenloch, archaeologists discovered bear skulls arranged in stone chambers, with bones positioned in patterns that some interpreted as evidence of ritual worship. Modern science suggests that natural cave processes, such as flooding, rockfalls, and hibernating bears, could create these arrangements without human intervention.
The taphonomic explanation is compelling. Cave bears used the same caves for hibernation across thousands of years, with natural mortality, seasonal flooding, rockfalls, and subsequent generations of bears clearing dens, potentially creating arrangements that appear deliberate to human observers. Drachenloch's 30,000 bear bones accumulated across 100,000 years, requiring only 2 deaths per year to create the massive assemblage without systematic human hunting.
Yet the presence of red ochre on some bear bones suggests intentional treatment, indicating that these encounters carried symbolic weight beyond simple predation. The 6 criteria functioned as a survival algorithm that determined which human populations thrived and which disappeared into evolutionary obscurity. Every failure concentrated risk, while success created cascading advantages that reshaped our species. The disease web reveals the hidden cost of even successful domestication. Animals domesticated earliest share the most pathogens with us, Every commensal relationship created opportunities for pathogens to evolve human-compatible forms. The settlements that pioneered domestication simultaneously became disease laboratories. Cross-species empathy emerged as an adaptive technology. Groups capable of extending care beyond immediate survival needs possess social flexibility that helped them navigate crises.
The Bonn Oberkassel puppy burial demonstrates this psychological innovation that may have provided broader survival advantages.
Most attempts failed, not because humans lacked determination, but because the animals themselves could not pass through the evolutionary bottleneck that domestication requires. We stand at the edge of that same jaw today, at the bedside of fevered companions we choose to save rather than abandon. The animals that almost killed us also taught us how to live with limits and with care. Every species we have examined reveals the same truth. Domestication was not conquest, but negotiation. The 6 biological filters bent human societies around themselves. Groups that understood these limits survived. Those that did not became evolutionary footnotes, buried alongside their failed experiments. The Egyptian hyena handlers paid for prestige with parasites and broken bones. The commensal pigs rewrote their own brains in exchange for garbage.
The lost proto-dogs of Goye and Razboynica vanished when climate turned harsh, taking their human partners into obscurity.
Yet something extraordinary emerged from these dangerous partnerships. The Bonn Oberkassel puppy, nursed through 3 bouts of distemper by humans who gained nothing from its survival, documents the moment our species learned to extend care beyond economic logic, to love across the species barrier. This capacity for cross-species empathy may be our defining characteristic. Not intelligence, not tool use, but the willingness to invest in relationships that transcend immediate survival needs. These partnerships taught us that some bonds matter more than calories. The diseases we inherited, measles from cattle, influenza from pigs, countless parasites from close contact, represent the hidden cost of civilization itself. We became who we are partly through surviving these biological exchanges. The biological gauntlet was not just about the animals. It was about us. The groups that survived were not necessarily the strongest or the smartest, but those capable of forming bonds that mattered more than immediate utility. Today, when we choose expensive surgery for an elderly pet or nurse, a sick animal back to health, we are honoring a tradition that began 14,000 years ago in a German grave. In our modern world of smartphones and satellites, we remain the species that will sit up all night with a fevered dog. Not because it makes economic sense, but because some bonds transcend calculation. The animals we could not tame taught us something the tamed ones never could, that the most profound relationships are not built on control, but on mutual respect for what remains forever wild.
If this journey through prehistory's most perilous relationships left you questioning everything you thought you knew about the bonds between humans and the animal world, don't let it end here. Subscribe to uncover more uncomfortable truths buried in our shared past with the creatures that shaped us.